I have an idea as to how we might respond to that. That is a complaint against Dr. AKIMOTO, which is more of a complaint than a notice of concern.
Which complaint is that?
This, I apologize. Oops, I even shouldn't have said the name. 008, although that has publicly been stated already that a complaint was put in. So I'm not violating any of our rules and regulations. It has to do with unprofessional conduct and harassment as being the accusation against Dr. AKIMOTO by virtue of his going on a radio program and making crude comments, quote, his crude comments made during the live radio show, quote, the link, unquote, on August 27, 2020. So, and that is the extent of the complaint. The issue, of course, has to do, not of course, but I think it becomes clear that the issue is a balance of free speech versus unprofessional conduct. And I would like to ask Mr. Weinberg, Attorney Weinberg, your opinion in this regard, because I know you've had a chance both to review the case and to review the program, what he said.
Okay, I haven't actually seen the complaint, but as I understand it, this is a complaint by some public health department employees against Dr. Vince AKIMOTO because of things that he is said to have said on the link, which is a radio station, or Dr. AKIMOTO. I did a quick Google search on Guam. There's lots of YouTube videos of him calling into radio stations, and some of them are like this, a Zoom kind of environment where you can see him speaking, and he's speaking about his opinion about public health, and in particular the medical director of public health, and how they are handling the response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Some of his language is pretty colorful, and overall, absent more, and in particular, a complaint by perhaps Dr. Manglonia, the director, I think that this is a question of free speech. He's expressing his opinion in public as a physician, just expressing himself popularly or not. And I don't think that it's something that the board would be able to go after based on my understanding. I think it would be, whatever he's done on air is pretty much protected by the First Amendment, from what I understand.
In that, if that's the legal opinion, can you put that in writing for the board, and perhaps to the author of the, I don't know that they identified the author per se, but perhaps the first signature on there? Zinnia?
I think the employees were pretty upset, Rob, because of how he treated Dr. Magnolia, and the words that he used against her were very. It wasn't just colorful. I mean, it's very demeaning.
They were, and I just caught brief stuff. I just heard of it today. I went online today and kind of looked at some of the stuff, and I think they were followed up, kind of with Dr. Shea commenting about them, and they were followed up after that by a link with public health employees in kind of the management sector saying that's not affecting them. I can let me see it. Let me have the complaint, and if we can identify who it is, I can try and respond to them on behalf of the board. And yeah, it's not. It's even in the worst, and I think that I may have heard the worst case scenario of what he said and how he said it, and it was injudicious, beyond injudicious. But I don't think it's not protected. I think it's protected by the First Amendment, and it's not something that's actionable by the board. It's something that can be disciplined. I feel like the prosecutor in the Netflix show, the trial of the Chicago 7. He's talking to the Attorney General for the first time about the merits of the case.
So what's the difference with, we had a case recently about racial discrimination. So what is the difference between that case and this case? This is against women.
That's, you know what? That's a great question.
You know, I don't think
And
so. It's gonna be
I'm
hard for
sorry?
me to, it's gonna be hard for me to defend Vince because he was just I'm not allowed to say the words that he was saying, but he really messed up. But I don't think he was talking about women. He was talking about Dr. Manglonia. And I've known Vince for, golly, 20, 25 years. He just gets excited sometimes and he out of his mind. And I know he took a ton of backlash on this. And Dr. Manglonia is married to a very good friend of mine. Our CFO at the bank is her daughter-in-law aunt, if that makes sense. And that was very, very terrible. And I think the island completely, everybody rose up against Vince and said, who do you think you are? And, but I don't think it was, I know Women's Affairs came out with it, against it, but I don't, the problem with Vince, he will do that to anybody. And I think his wings have been clipped. Yeah, but if we want to take some action, I'll be behind you. But it was really, really disappointing because he's a ferocious fighter for medicine on island and medical care, but he completely lost at that point. And I think he realizes it.
Yeah, I think that part, I mean, I think I can agree that he is an equal opportunity attacker, if you will, in that he's attacked everybody, including yours truly, on the air, right? So he can. I agree with you that at times you sit there and say, what is he thinking to do these things? But I honestly have no idea where the line is drawn in terms of First Amendment rights. That's why the whole time I saw this, I thought this is so clearly a legal issue as much as it is anything else, and that I don't know where. But if you've seen it, Rob, that's your opinion. I don't know. I mean, I don't like it. I don't like what he said. Anybody does. Nobody does. Nobody likes it. I don't think there's anybody. I didn't hear one single person coming to his defense. Not a single person. And I listened like Rob did to the clip of him on the air. I didn't exactly stay tuned in for an hour or two, but even the hosts of the show were immediately taken aback, right? So they were, I don't know if shock might be hyperbole, but they certainly were, didn't like it and told him to stop it, right? So
let me interject. It was without being Vince AKIMOTO, it was effed up. Yeah. And we wrote the letter with Dr. David, referenced a little bit a while ago about racism stuff. Maybe we write Vince a letter along the same lines. It's not racism, but attacking people, whether they be a woman or a man, but just not stirring up the community. He's a doctor. He's a very, very well-known physician on the island. And as such, he has, and people listen to him, he has responsibility to the island to be responsible. So I wouldn't mind sending him a letter saying what the heck you think you were doing, so even if it's approved. But I wouldn't mind writing him a stern letter saying, "Come on, Vince."
Well, I don't want to prejudge the mayor either way, or defend him or prosecute him. But I want to try and address what Zena asked. Okay, and there is a difference in the law, maybe not in our opinions, but at least in the law, in calling somebody a vulgar name and making a statement based on their immutable characteristics like race or sex or religion. So if he were to say that Dr. Berg is because of his religion, that would be a different thing than just saying he's a fill in the blank vulgar word. Okay, The last example that we had that we're talking about involved a generic racial reference that I think I could defend as being not just a statement of opinion. It brought disrepute on the medical profession, but more importantly, this is a part of the medicine that is underserved and discriminated against. And the whole question of Black Lives Matter is what can the profession do to fix a historical inequity within the profession. And it's a really different issue that I think the law, I mean, I could write a paper probably, but maybe I should, on the difference between that and calling somebody a vulgar name that happens to correspond to a historically sexist comment that a couple years from now, intelligent professional men are not going to be using again. You have to find another word.
In that space, I see room for us to, if we're not able, without putting the board in legal jeopardy, there's still room for us to say, I'm asking this, Rob, I see, but you tell me if I'm correct, that there's room for us to write a letter as a board to Dr. Akimoto expressing our concern as a board. And although the even telling him that this is protected by free speech and we recognize that, but we would encourage you to be more responsible in your behavior, particularly as you are a leader in healthcare in this community. Something like that. Do we have an ability to do that legally?
No, I'd have to see it, but I think that in the last incident, Dr. David articulated some really great thoughts, put them down on paper, and I think that about the issue of racism within medicine generally. And I think that perhaps as a general statement from the board to the medical profession on Guam as a whole, saying, look, these are issues that we need to be aware of in our practice, that whether we intend them or not are microaggressions, whether on race or sex based, that we need to, we as a profession, you as a profession, need to take a second and third look at, and maybe not accept so willingly and easily as we have. That there have been, and use the recent examples from, I think it's for less than 6 months now, and we don't even have to be that specific, but just use them as an opportunity to educate.
Well, you know, that's a good point because, for example, and I think there may be, the education component of it is probably not a bad thing. And Annette, I'm anxious to see what your thoughts are with this. For example, I think, as some of you may know, my mother was a physician. And if you wanted to see her have steam come out of her ears, was when she was talking to another physician, and obviously I'm talking about male physicians, and that person would call her honey. She'd go nuts. And typically the individual involved didn't understand that he had done anything wrong, right? And she would immediately, I witnessed it a bunch of times growing up, that type of thing, and she would say, excuse me, do you call your male physicians honey too? And he said, no, but I call them buddy. And what's the difference? It's in terms of endearment. It means that I like you. And it became a very difficult thing at times for her to convince that person that it was inappropriate, and to say, you probably shouldn't be calling him buddy. You know, that you should just be talking to people in a professional manner. And you're not realizing that that's inappropriate, that you're talking about 30 years ago here, 40 perhaps, that was happening. And those people being unaware that calling a woman honey would be offensive, right? Now, I don't think in our wildest imagination, well, no, in our wildest imagination, certainly, but typically you would never expect that to happen these days, right? That people are treated in a respectful and professional manner and not called honey. And by the way, the tone often was condemning at least at that time. You know, it's more like, listen, honey, I got to talk to you. And then one time I remember particular, a Southern guy, and I took offense. I think I was 12, right? That he was talking to my mother that way. So So anyway, the point being, there's very little harm in reminding the medical community of the need to be aware of how they interact, and that Vince may not, and the public may not be, he may not have intended to have that be directed towards women, but as a woman, it was, I think, particularly inappropriate language, right? Because it wouldn't have been used towards a man necessarily. It could have been, right? It could have been, but unlikely, given that particular choice of words. So, Annette, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think maybe beyond the legal dimension, I see this as Vince having lost social capital, right? This is about the loss of social capital, the loss of credibility in the community. And I think perhaps the way to resolve this, if he's willing, is for him to just come out and make a very sincere public apology. And I think that's probably what the complainants are after, is just some sort of validation that this was not appropriate behavior, that he realizes it. And for Vince, this would help in towards his regaining some of that capital that he lost.
If I may, Dr. David, there was a follow-up interview on K57 with Patty Arroyo, where Dr. Akimoto did make a public apology. So that piece has already been done.
But it was not a sincere apology. I think he really needs to, yeah, I don't know.
Don't you think, Zina, that's really what the complainants are after?
I think so,
Right.
because I mean, you're talking about 3/4 of public health that actually wrote a petition. And I don't know what the resolution.
Maybe Annette, you have a decent relationship with Vince?
It's okay. We're not particularly close, but we know each other.
Because
If you want me to try and talk to him?
talk to him, and maybe then the way would be the people who are offended, if he's apologized to the community, great. But maybe he can address those who were specifically more offended to the point that they wrote a letter to us, and see if he can pen and or meet and direct that apology directly towards them. And maybe it would be more powerful and impactful, rather than me telling them about my mother. Talk about it on a personal level. If you have experiences like that where people fail to understand the impact that a poor choice of words can have on a woman as a physician, because maybe he failed to understand that part of it. And maybe, I'm not saying he did, I'm saying maybe, and maybe you could, if you explained it to him on a personal basis, he could better understand that he needs to be sensitive to that things as much as those guys saying, honey, 40 years ago, didn't understand that my mother took offense to that. And that's an obvious one for us. Maybe his not understanding that using a word that is rather gender specific was particularly onerous. So that their public apology is more sincere.
I can certainly do that on a personal basis, Nat, but keep in mind that the complaint was officially submitted to the board, and so I think the complainants will be expecting action, official action also from the board.
That's going to be our difficulty if we're going up against, freedom of speech, so that maybe that is official action, right? That you as a board member discussed it with the individual, and that if they find resolution in his either writing, speaking, whatever, addressing it directly to them, then maybe we've done our job. Educated him, if you will, if appropriate, and then also letting them know that he has, and Xenia, who is part of public health in this regard, in this specific complaint, takes offense. Xenia, let me ask you, because you're part of that, if he were to specifically address those who took offense with it, would that be, for lack of a better word, and you're just one individual, would that be what you're looking for?
Mhm.
Okay. So hopefully Xenia represents those who are offended, and maybe that would be enough to address it. If we can't, if we're not able to take any further action regarding his expression of freedom of speech.
Well, I
You-
think there's a distinct difference between free speech and appropriate speech. And, you know, I can't go in the theater and yell fire, as the justice said. But my son, when he was still in high school, used to say, well, Dad, it's free speech. And well, it's not appropriate speech. And
Right.
what Vince did was not appropriate. And okay, so, you know, I grew up, you're polite to everybody. You say yes, you say thank you, you say please. And not everybody lives that way. But not everybody uses the F word to describe each other. And that is very, very inappropriate. And I think a letter along those lines, yeah, Vince, you have the right to say whatever you want, freedom of speech, except fire in theater, but it's completely wrong, it's unifying our community and have people believe in our physicians when you start effing the other people, especially during this crisis in our island. And that's the deal. He said this, was it 3 months ago, when we're all still discovering COVID. And we're still discovering COVID. I mean, I'm on the doc, on with you docs, and you know that more than I. But for him to all of a sudden freak out and yell at her, and you know, she left to go to the VA. Why? Was it because that position was open, or did she just say I can't take it anymore because of people like Vince? And so I'd like to send him, if we're allowed to, Rob, a very stern letter, and instead of Nate, you being the signing of it as chair, I'd like to see all of us sign it, just so he gets the message that he did something wrong.
But I don't see why those both can't be done. We can decide to send a letter, but I think it's the right thing to do for him to apologize specifically. And if Xenia perceived that it wasn't sincere, the reason I asked him that is if you felt comfortable just out of the blue, if you will, calling him and saying, I want to talk to you about the complaint that we got and help you to understand where people are coming from, because the board shares the concern that they have, that this was inappropriate and that it may very well have unknowingly, you may have degraded women in the profession as well by using a specific term that is applicable. Phil, you know that the term he used was not the F word. It was a term that is specifically, tends to be broadly used in a gender specific manner. Right?
Oh, the B word. Okay, all right. Yeah, I will say this. If as a CEO of several companies, if Vince worked for me, I don't care how good he is, I would have fired him. Period.
But we know that, but we can't fire him. So
I know.
He needs to be reminded of professionalism and the guidelines.
Exactly.
The American Board of Family Medicine does have professionalism guidelines published on their website. I don't believe that Dr. Akimoto continues to be board certified by the American Board of Family Medicine, but it is a helpful document when defining what professionalism is. So, you know, maybe just reminding him of that. My second question is, what type of apology does the Department of Public Health verify as sincere, Xenia? Because does the letter need to be published in the PDN? Does he need to take them out to lunch? Can he go there and talk to them? Like what is needed to satisfy sincerity?
I saw that interview where he apologized, and Doc, I mean, if you look at that, that is not sincere. To me, it was kind of like a mocking, oh, okay, well, I'm sorry kind of thing. That is not sincere. I think it would be nice if he came and he spoke to the employees. That would be great, but I know that's not going to happen because of COVID. But maybe even a letter to them apologizing, that would be good enough. I mean, if I read that letter, then I'd be great, because that B word was not just a hurtful word. Those are fighting words for a woman.
Yeah, it's not nice.
So that is not
So your
nice.
specific request is a letter addressed to the Department of Public Health that
not
has sincerity in it.
That's not my request. That's a recommendation because I don't speak on behalf of the employees of public health, but I do know just from conversations with them that they were all offended. So something that will,
What if you don't write the letter? What if he says, I've already apologized, I don't have to do anything else? Because that's a possibility coming from Vince.
it could be,
And that, I think it's worth, I mean, I think part of our function is to try and settle things between grieving parties, what have you, at the lowest level, if you will. And if we can, but I'm talking on a personal basis here, not necessarily as the chairman. I think it's important that he understand, and not from another male's perspective, but from a woman's perspective, what he did. And I don't think he's likely to be able to talk with Dr. Manglonia personally, but maybe from another female physician who's also a leader and involved in a fight with COVID. That's why I specifically think Dr. David might be the right person, so he can, he won't feel defensive that he might if Dr. Manglonia was there. Instead, someone who he has no beef with, no argument, has a nice positive working relationship, still says, hey, Vince, it's not just her. I feel that way. I'm not speaking for you, Annette, but I'm saying, I'm speaking why I think it might be good for you is if he says, oh, somebody else who has no beef with me per se, feels the same way, then maybe he could take a second look and say, that really was a really particularly bad choice of words. And it is appropriate for me to write a letter saying, I'm sorry for my choice of words. I shouldn't have done that, although blah, 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 whatever else he wants to write, so long as he understands that he has to be careful that that language can be very hurtful to an individual and to females. To public health, I think any nasty word would have been offensive given the efforts that they're making to fight COVID, but specifically to the women involved.
Yep.
This is where I think it's just wrong. If my daughter or sister or mother worked up there, I'd be pissed.
And also, Doc, you got to remember that the culture of public health, yeah, I mean, it's because of the culture. And Dr. David, you know how public health is. They're very tight knit. This is a very tight knit group, and they respect Dr. Manglonia. They've been with her for years, so they all took offense. I mean, it was towards her, but they all felt it.
Yeah.
We had people crying in our meetings because they were totally offended. I mean, that's something that we really need to take seriously as a board.
Okay,
I'm happy to talk to him. I would prefer to do it as a designee of the board rather than on a personal level. And I'll report to you guys the next time we meet. And hopefully he will be open to that letter of apology to public health, which really I think will go a long way towards, resolving the issue.
I think for the whole community, it would be good.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
That's a good point. It is the communities. We're all going through this COVID thing. And the ladies on our board, the docs and the others, I grew up in a household. I was the only boy with 3 sisters. So I was the one they practiced dancing with. I was the one blind dates. But I can go anywhere where there's a setting and the men are there, the girls are there. I'll hang out with the girls because I feel much more comfortable, but I feel so comfortable. So I'm going to follow the lead of you ladies,
Me too.
and I'll do what you guys girls do. I'm with him because I think it's terrible. I was really upset with him because I like Vince.
I would make a motion then that we assign Dr. David to interact with Dr. AKIMOTO to understand the board's concerns and to encourage him to write a sincere letter of apology to the Department of Public Health regarding his comments.
Okay.
Everybody, anybody second that?
I'll second.
Second, Dr. Adelson?
I'll third. I'll
Okay.
third.
All in agreement, and that is how we should proceed. Thank you, Annette, for volunteering to do that. Okay, now I apologize because I thought it was going to be a legal issue, but it turns a bit more the discussion. Although I hope that